Alright, welcome to episode 6 of the 1970 Dodge Dart Custom Restoration. Going to be taking down the rest of the headliner and trying to tear apart as much of the interior as possible, so that way I can get this thing down to a rolling shell and do more body work. Eventually get these seats out of here and take care of this floor pan in the front. And I'll show you guys that a little bit later. So, going to get these seat belt storage brackets out of the way. Then, going to get these headliner bow clips out of here and take down some of the trim. Alright, to take down the front storage bracket, you want to use a Phillips head screw. You want to use a Phillips head screwdriver in here, and then do the rear one, same thing, just right above the B pillar. Alright, had to go switch screwdrivers because the other one was not big enough. Alright, I guess I'm going to have to put you guys down and do this because this screw probably hasn't moved since this car was built, and it does not want to cooperate right now. Alright, none of these screws up here want to cooperate, but this one does. And this is the trim cover that goes over the seam of the headliner right there on the B pillar. And you can actually see how it's kind of a different color, even though they're both supposed to be F8 dark green. Alright, I was able to get these things to cooperate, and they still kind of don't want to move, but it took a little bit of pushing on it just the right way, and it actually popped. So there you go. Take that off of there and then drop it, and then this should come off, unless there's another screw underneath it. So it means you got to go in here and take these two Phillips head screws off, slide that up, and then get the bottom screw and then put that back together for going into the bag and keep them all in one place. And something to note before you put the stuff into the bag is that the headliner actually goes in between this part of the bracket and the retainer up here on the roof structure. See if maybe I can't take you guys along for a bit of the destruction. Just need something to pop this leather strip off of there. Try to get it started. Should be able to rip the rest of it. Nope. This stuff is absolutely so rotted. Look at that, it's falling apart. So, gonna have to keep on working on this, get the other doors done, but the bottom part actually came off. So it's been a few days since went to Indiana, kind of on the border there with Kentucky. Excuse me. And I do apologize, I was not able to film any of the progress that I made, but the engine is now out of the truck. This is from a 1968 Dart. I don't know if that car was a sedan, like a 2-door or a 4-door, but this engine was pulled out of it 15 years ago, and last time that car ran was 15 years ago. This engine does turn over freely and smoothly. Was originally a power steering car. This has a double groove crankshaft pulley, so I'll need to figure out what to do about the air conditioning. I went and rebuilt this carburetor, and there was red sediment in the bottom of the bowl and a bunch of varnish in it. So went and cleaned it out, scrubbed it with hot water, and wiped it clean with some kerosene where it needed it, and then put a rebuild kit in it. This, however, will not work for the 1970 application because the PCV valve is on the wrong side and it does not have a provision for vacuum signal to the heat riser flap in the intake, the air cleaner. And as you can see, this one is unsilenced, so it doesn't need that, but I'll probably be putting this air cleaner assembly up for sale. Then the valve cover also needs to be switched out because the PCV, the oil filler, and the breather are not in the right order. As a matter of fact, this one does not have a separate oil filler like the 1970 model. So I'm going to put this engine into the Dart to try to get it running and test fit it and mock up everything that's been taken off the car and everything that's missing. So a few other things that need to get changed, since the thing is not correct for 1970, are the kickdown linkage and a few minor other things. I think the fuel pump, go around the other side. Yeah, the fuel pump is not the right style, I don't think anyways, for 1970. Plus, looks like the intake side of the fuel pump is crammed full of dirt, so need to change that out anyways. Coil is original, has a date code on it. Looks like the distributor cap is original. I don't know if this thing's ever had a tune-up or not, but you can actually see that there is a Chrysler part number and a forward look logo right there on the rotor. I went and put some oil in the felt that's inside the distributor shaft. Remove the oil filter and wipe that down with kerosene, because that part of the oil pump was absolutely filthy, and there was some congealed oil that was actually rock hard, and once I was able to scrape it off, it melted and turned into this tar-like substance. It was pretty nasty. So I'm going to remove these upper control arms off of this assembly and replace this brake drum, since somebody torched through it and actually left the hub on there. Then we get this in there. There's going to be some minor things to change on the slant 6 going in, but this is like deja vu from the gold Dart, which is behind this one right now in the garage. And I mean that in saying that the steering gear did not want to decouple from the shaft there at the steering column. The torsion bars are fighting me, just like the last car. And this driver's side still has not wanted to come out. I've tried removing the pivot bolt and pulling it forward. The bushing separated and it's jammed again. I unfortunately don't have the special tool to get this torsion bar out, because they do make a torsion bar removal tool that clamps around the torsion bar and you kind of pound on it with a hammer. And see if I can work at it, otherwise I'll have to figure out where to get this special tool from, or try something else. But once I drop this thing out of here, be able to swap the engines out. And no, it's not going in like that. This thing is just going to be able to run and drive, hopefully, enough to be able to take it somewhere and actually get it painted. So they're probably going to be dropping out the engine there again. And it's not going to be like a quickie Mako job or anything like that. So, need to change out some things like the fuel lines right there, the rubber fuel hoses rather. And then I'm thinking about actually installing the disc brakes that I bought and putting them in here instead of these 9-inch drums. And for those with a good memory and a good eye, I remember mentioning this car was built August 18th, 1969, and that is from a 68 Dart, and you can kind of see 68 Darts, 69 Darts, and early build 70s all used this particular drum with a harmonic spring around it to try to cancel out some noise and vibrations. Now, somewhere along the line in 1970, since the other Dart is a late build, that was June 16th of 1970, it has a drum that looks a little wider. There you go. Yeah, it has a drum that looks a little wider, but probably really isn't. It might be thicker, but it's still a 9 by 2.5 inch drum, and it actually has fins, flared fins, that go along the outside of the drum here, probably for cooling. So, just a little interesting difference to note. And for those who didn't see the last video, this is why this K-frame is getting replaced, because this car is actually in an accident, and this thing says plenty of evidence down the left side of this accident, but this K-frame was probably damaged in that accident and it's totally smashed up. I'm just going to strip everything down for parts, and this K-frame is probably going to get scrapped. Alright, got the jumper cables hooked up to the E150 that actually brought this engine home, and let's see what happens. Got the positive cable hooked up to the starter, and negative side has jumped to the transmission housing right now. This is not going to run, but let's see if it turns over, because I need to get some gasoline and do a few other things before everything starts up. So this is where the starter relay would normally be. So after a lot of hitting on the K-frame with the BFH, the torsion bar finally came out. Unfortunately not at the control arm, but back there, yeah, way back there at the cross member, kind of like where this one is anchored at. The slant 6 should be ready to drop in. It seems like right now it actually does not have any spark. Try to turn it over, but hopefully that'll change once everything is wired up in the car here. This is the original wiring to the car, but I don't think I'm going to be using it. The wiring from the gold Dart is actually going to be in here, and it's going to be what's used. and it's just going to be temporary to try to get this thing to fire up for the first time in 15 years. I don't know how long it's been since the original engine to this car was ever fired up, but unfortunately I can't try that because the guy who has it won't give it back. And as usual, this car has the habit of giving me surprises, and right here it looks like some kind of animal got in the frame rail, decided to build a nest, and all the crap that it dragged into the frame rail kind of rotted it out right there at the starter shield. Yeah, where that used to be mounted. But it doesn't look like it's gone all the way through to both sides of the frame rail, so no big deal, just cut and patch that later on. After quite a bit of fighting and wrestling with this thing, finally got it onto the K-frame jig. Got the power steering box back on and bolted up. Connected down there at the pitman arm also to the center link. Alright, got this side done. Next thing I need to do is start removing these upper control arms, because I'm going to reuse the ones that are already in the car and save these for later. Maybe reuse them in something else. Then changed out the fuel pump for one that I know is good, but I need to do a little bit with the gasket, since the gasket at the block tore, unfortunately. Then going to replace stuff like vacuum lines and little things like that, and hopefully get this thing in the car. I don't know if it'll be tonight, but it'll be soon. Been working a few hours, and unfortunately it got dark, but the engine is now on the K-frame jig. Got the upper control arms removed, and everything is lined up to go in. It might be raining tomorrow, but I did put a bag over the throat to the carburetor. Should keep water out, but otherwise it should actually give this thing a little bit of a bath, which it actually need. And hopefully if it dries out tomorrow, be able to put this thing up in the car, get all the wiring from the other car in, and try to get this thing fired up for real. It seems like it had a no spark condition before. If I mentioned that, I'm not sure. Then, I don't know if you guys can see it all that well since it's dark, but the kickdown linkage for the 68 here is not exactly right, and that's because it's missing a bolt. It would go right through here in that hole, and then right in this slot. I'll show you guys in the morning when it's a little bit brighter, but I think that'll do it for the night. It's now the next day. I went and replaced the fuel pump gasket and tried a brand new E-clip on the choke pull-off for the carburetor, and both of those worked. So the engine is now ready to go inside the car. Use the engine crane to lift the car as high as it would go, and got some 6-ton jack stands set also as high as they can go. I know that's not recommended, but it looks like it's going to clear. I can try to take off the lid of the air filter, and it should give me a couple more inches, hopefully. See what happens. Alright, a bit of struggling in the morning with some torsion bars and the front suspension, but looks like this thing is in. Just got to do a bit of final tightening on a few last nuts and bolts, then get the electrical system set up, try to put the gauge cluster back in the dash, and it should be hopefully ready to fire. And for anybody wondering, the car plus everything here, as you see it, costs less than $1,000. I think it might be the cheapest 1970 Dodge Dart in the country. We'll see.